Hello, everyone, and we're live with another exciting and interesting topic, something that we never talk about, that is application security. But today, we wanted to do things slightly different, and we invited a super interesting guest back to actually moderate a little bit the session, help us understanding what is the philosophy and the craziness that's happening in our heads as security professional. And we're going to do a little bit of security therapy, shall we call it this way, Beck?
Yeah, kind of.
Brilliant. But before we dive deeper, let me make an introduction. So thank you, everyone. My name is Francesco Cipollone. I'm the CEO and founder of Phoenix Security, and I have the absolute pleasure to have with me. Shall we start with you, Ruta? You want to give, for a few people that don't know you, who you are, what you do, and what's your passion for AppSec?
So, hello.
I think we might have some slight problem. We lost your audio.
Hi, my name is Ruta. I am the DevSecOps lead at a major retailer. I try to describe.
All right, Beck, do you want to jump in while Ruta fixes the
That's not good.
connection?
Okay.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
No? Give me a moment. Let me join.
Connection seems slow.
Okay, Beck, so shall we start with
Ruta's... Yeah. I think she's had a few connection problems by the sounds of it. It was very slow. My name is Beck McKeown. I'm a chartered psychologist, and I did a master's degree in applied psychology 20 odd years ago. And ever since then, I've done research and consultancy on psychology in the workplace. And that's varied from the aviation industry, from defence and security, and now I find myself mostly in cybersecurity. And I find
dealing with us crazy.
I am with you crazy lot. But I think for me, cybersecurity is fairly new compared to aviation and defence. And I think there's a lot of things that aviation and defence have already gone through the pain of working out where things go wrong as far as people are concerned. So I think that there's a great opportunity to transfer some of that learning and knowledge into cybersecurity, and that's kind of what my role is.
Brilliant. And probably, so today in the webinar, we want to do a little bit of jump around the metrics that matter, the psychology that operates. And as application security, I think probably the discussion with one of my good friends was we're more salesmen and psychologists and therapists than anything else. And if you see us talking around application security, it looks like a therapy session amongst all of us.
Yeah.
But it's very intertwined with behavioral science, because we have basically to convince the other side of the fence from a development perspective on actually doing something that is additional work. And then we need to convince the business that they need to slow down a little bit to actually do things securely. So there are several aspects that I think are very intertwined with how you should influence, steer, and convince, not coerce, people into doing security.
Yeah, and I think also from a security perspective, it's kind of understanding how the human mind works and why people behave the way they do, because that gives you quite a lot of explanations as to reasons that why people don't always do what you would like them to do. And I think that if you understand why people do what they do and you want to change that, you've at least stand a fighting chance, because you're going to address the right thing instead of just keep repeating the point or hammering home you must do cybersecurity, because that really generally has the effect of switching people off rather than onto your message.
Aren't we in the cybersecurity awareness month, so that everybody's saying we shall be secure, we shall do things securely? And I think it's overly used as a sentence. Does it actually drive the message home? Does it actually change behavior? Repeating over and over?
No, not really, because if people haven't switched on to that message in the first place, you're just going to switch off even more. I think there's a thing the brain has got an awful. It's a busy organ in our bodies. There's a lot of information to take in. So what it tends to do is things that you hear regularly become automatic, and you kind of switch off for them and don't notice them. And to give you an example of that is if you're driving around your hometown, you're not looking at what speed limit signs are. You don't look at any of the signs around you unless they particularly move. Have the flashing signs that say, slow down, you're now entering a 40 zone or something like that. But if it's your local town, you don't bother looking at those because your brain knows where it's going. It knows which direction it's going in. So what it's focusing on is the traffic in front of you. You're looking out for any hazards, and actually your mind is probably on where you're going and why you're doing that. Or you might be thinking you've got to have such and such for dinner later, pick the kids up from school. So you're not really taking on board all of those signs. So they've become automatic. Your brain thinks, I know what that means. I don't need to pay any attention anymore. So if you transfer that across to cybersecurity, then I guess what you've got is that same point keeps hitting home and people just switch off to it. And I think that if it's also done in a way that's almost telling people off, you will, you're naughty if you don't, that is a bit of a switch off too, because if in terms of influence, people say yes to people they like. So if you're somebody who's telling people off all the time, how are they going to feel about you? Then kind of just go, yeah, and off they go and keep, if you're walking down the corridor, they dodge off into the kitchen or something so they don't have to hear you again. So it's just about, for me, it's about thinking about those quite simple human traits when you think about awareness and think about how you're going to go about trying to get people to do, to be more secure.
Brilliant. And Ruta, thank you for joining back. Audio is still off though. So Ruta joins us.
Technology is great when it works,
when it works, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. So Ruta represent the other side of the party. So join us from ASDA, and they're doing an interesting transformation on DevSecOps. So this they fit right in on the whole transformation piece on actually convincing fundamentally business that need to go 3,000 miles per hour, that they need to do maybe 2,000 miles per hour and do things a little bit more securely. I think in the past webinar, we had Charles, that is the head of risk for Netflix, and we were discussing as a security professional, we need to kind of not say no, but kind of inform the business. This is back on your road sign back. This is kind of the speed limit that you should be going at. And this is the velocity that you can sustain. Now, not everybody will pay attention to that speed limit. Somebody will go faster. Somebody will go way faster. And we also need to help the business recover from that. But instead of saying no, we should influence the behavior on saying this is the stuff that you can tolerate. This is the risk level that you can operate on to reach your maximum potential. But sometimes we go in the safe mode and say no, it's wrong. No, it's not secure. No, you should not do that. And we end up having fights with specific development community for one specific reason that I'm sure Ruta can cover extensively. That is fundamentally trying to convince developers that are not measured on those metrics. I think we have a little bit of back.
Oh my god!
Feedback from your end.
It's not going well. I'll mute myself while someone else is talking. Can you hear me though now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, right. We're getting that right. I'll mute myself.
But fundamentally, we need to convince developers that are not measured in terms of performance on achieving security target right now. They're actually measured on how many things you can develop on a weekly or on a bi-weekly basis, depending on this concept called sprint. And then we need to convince the business that actually an important metrics that they should account for. So they should do a little bit less, but also consider that. The challenge is convincing them of the why and digging a little bit deeper. That I think is the more interesting part. But Ruta, do you wanna? I'm gonna mute myself and I'm gonna let you speak. Do you want to
so
give a little
sorry.
bit of background?
I'm so sorry. Hopefully you can all hear me now. I have moved over from my laptop to my partner's laptop, and he has a completely different setup to what I'm used to, so I'm sorry. Not prepared in the slightest. So yes, hi, I'm Ruta. I'm a DevSecOps lead at a major retailer in the UK. I try to ensure developers don't hate security and security doesn't hate the developers, sometimes more successfully than others. Today is clearly not a successful day in comparison. So yeah, so I'm sorry, I've missed the very beginning of these conversations, but I know like it's very interesting to kind of look into the psychology of how we talk to other areas of the business within security. With, you know, as Becca's mentioned, it's very easy for us to continually say the same thing over and over, and it's not actually getting through. We are well known as the people who say no and don't ever say yes and always block people and everything like that. So of course, teams avoid speaking to us when they can get away with it, right? There's so many things that security teams don't even see that happen day to day because teams will hide it because they don't want to talk to you. So it's all about trying to foster that communication that allows them to feel like, okay, if I tell security something is happening, I'm not going to get berated at and told my managers are going to have to get involved and it's not going to get escalated all the way to the top of the company and I'm going to, you know, get put on a disciplinary or whatever it is. It's showing actually, great, thank you for giving us that information. Let's see what we can do with it. Like, what can we do? You know, where else can we take that? Is that happening just in your area? Is it happening everywhere else across the business? Instead of berating people for coming to you, it's actually just saying, hey, thank you for telling us. Let's see what we can do. So yes, so sorry for being a bit late, but hi.
No, I'm welcome. And in the kind of conversation, maybe I'll question for Beck. How do you convince somebody like a business owner that is not absolutely interested in this kind of objective that they should be doing this? Or maybe what is the influence of gamification where you can let team compete because fundamentally they're not paid for doing these things. So you need to help them and stimulate them in ways that is kind of self-initiative. And I know that is completely wrong because as security, this should be part of everyday business. But in reality is most of the time when you start what we call the security champion program, that is done on the side of the desk, that is done as an additional things that people do as a willingness to do things good, even though they're not measured about. And then we kind of negotiate with the business like, look, we achieved so many great things on the side of the desk. Maybe that should become a thing that we do more regularly. What do you think about the psychology? Beck, and I think you're on mute.
Oh, no, I'm off mute. Oh, no, Beck. Sorry, go for it.
Sorry, there's so much wrapped up in those couple of sentences that you said there. I think you've got. I'll just give you an overview. So you've got the personal skills of the people involved. There's a thing called emotional intelligence, which is about identifying, managing your own emotions, the impact you have on other people, and how they impact on you. There's a thing called cultural intelligence, which isn't necessarily about cross-cultural communication, but just about different cultures within the organisation. So how do you relate to and communicate with other people? So how are those teams communicating with each other? And actually, are you communicating with them in a language and a way they understand? So there's that side of things. Related to that is you need to understand what's important to other people because their priorities are going to be very different to yours. Mm-hmm. And so you've got that balance of things to understand. And then from an occupational psychology perspective, you've got the way that the business is set up. And you mentioned that quite clearly with you've got metrics in one group directly cause friction with the metrics from a different group. So it's not just about looking at what's going on with individual teams as well. It's about looking at the whole picture and seeing across the silos what's going on, because unintentionally, a lot of companies can actually set up groups to compete with each other and to have friction. And if that's happening, you're just making everybody less efficient and less effective. But it's about standing back and taking a look at the way that you do things and why you do them can make you think sometimes, oh, hang on a minute, we're not helping ourselves here. And I think that, Ruta, you've had a lot to say about that understanding and showing empathy towards different people in their circumstances, and that kind of, I think Ruta and I have had conversations before about how she manages those frictions in real life.
Yeah, definitely. So the key thing is that every area of the business is measured on something different in what they try to achieve. So a security person is told that their job is to think about security 9 to 5 every day, reduce the business risk. That is what you are measured against. You go to your developers and they are measured against how many features they pump out and how quickly they are able to deliver. You go to your testers, they're measured at how many bugs they find and how well working your application is. Or you go to user research, everyone has a completely different angle at what they are measured at. And so that is how easy it is to butt heads, because it looks like what you're working on is the most important thing. It is your entire world, and it's difficult to understand why everyone else isn't in that same world, when actually you're all trying to achieve the exact same thing. You're all trying to achieve a better product for the customer at the end, whether that's making it more secure, whether that's making it more aligned with what they want, whether that's making sure it's bug free, whatever it is. You're all trying to get to the same point, and it's remembering that when you're having conversations across the business that you are trying to achieve the same goal, just from different angles.
And that's a really interesting point that you raised there, because to me it all goes back to the metrics that matter. And what we tend to do is measure what we do. We don't measure the output. So if you think about what is the output the customer wants, well, the customer wants a secure something that does X, Y, and Z for whatever reason. And if you were to design metrics so that everybody was playing on the role of what the customer does, rather than you're not judging me for what I'm doing on my daily basis, can I do lots of these things very quickly? Is what I'm doing feeding that customer need? Because if it is, then you're contributing to that. And I wonder if there's some way of looking at metrics that are output focused, as in what the end product focused, rather than just what it is that you're producing each day.
I love this conversation
I don't know how,
because
yeah.
I love it because it's so simple, and looking at it from outside is so simple. Yet looking at it from a development perspective, from a product perspective, is so hard to actually link what are we delivering for our customer? Like, what is the product that we deliver to our customer? Business fight with that every day, and then we have this kind of disconnection of the business definition of a product and the business and the development definition of a product. From a development perspective, you focus on your code, your feature, your bunch of things that you're developing. As a security, you focus on the issue that particular line of code has. And then the business focus on the product that they need to deliver, the features that they need to do. There is a very fine line of things unified, but nobody understands really the context. It is, what is the output that we're trying to deliver? We're trying to fix security problem, or we're trying to deliver a secure product? That I think, and Ruta, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those are entirely two different landscape and scenario. One is volumetric based. One is sorry for saying it, but an idiotic measure of this is a pile of stinky stuff, and we're just going to fix it in a random order, hoping that it's going to deliver the outcome that we hope. And the other opposite is, we need to deliver this particular car. Let's deliver it with 4 wheels and a seat belt, so that at least we know that the customer can drive securely. And we ignore the rest of the maybe tiny problem that could cause nuisance, but at least deliver in a secure product to the client. What do you think, Ruta?
Yeah, definitely. I think security teams have a massive problem of getting really focused on one small aspect that actually doesn't make a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things, or is very, very unlikely. But it's also because we're not close enough to the context, right? You'll have, a development team will be working on one product within the company. You have one security team that deals with every product across the company. So everything that comes in, you look at it in the same level of threat, the same level of risk, even if that's not the case, even if this project is a completely internal project that will never be publicly facing. And this other project is your teams don't look at it like that. They will look at it in the exact same way, with the exact same policies, with the exact same thought process. And so inevitably you can make mistakes. I do find it quite interesting with what they've done in the engineering space, which I think security hasn't done very, very well yet, is in engineering space, they found that developers were performing far better when they understood the business value of what they were doing. So that's why the whole aspect of user stories came about in Agile. Like, as a user, I want this so that I can do this. So when you are building a piece of work, you can question it. It's like, is this actually contributing to this end user goal, or does this not? And it gives a developer the feeling that, oh yes, I know how I've added value to the end thing, even if this is just a tiny piece of it. And in security, we don't have that. We don't, like, there's been discussion about abuser stories and things like that. So adding, security focused tickets on the development side, there's not been anything discussing how do you bring, the customer value into security side. Do we need user stories or the equivalent of in our world to think about actually how does this relate to what our end user is dealing with? Like, it's the context that we lack. And, sometimes it's because we're not asking the right questions. Sometimes it's because we're too far away from what the business is building. We don't know what the business priorities are as well, because we're just not included in those conversations. But we've also probably not gone out and asked those questions in the first place either. So it's on both sides. It's not fair to point fingers.
I agree with you. I think there is a double whammy effect. The measurement that we use right now are not facilitating, from a security and development perspective, are not facilitating those kind of conversations. For the folks that are listening and for Beck, what's a stupid metric that we tend to use is service level agreements or SLA or things that we need to fix by X amount of date. And that deliver working in a completely atomic and isolated way. Or the number of critical vulnerability, critical issue that we solve that's removed from a context perspective, look at the specific atomic problem without looking at the context where that happened, and if even deliver value fixing that problem, and even if that problem exists. So from my perspective, doing application security for years and years, I think the metrics that we use right now from a security and development perspective are entirely wrong to measure quality of what we deliver. And that doesn't help us talking with the business, because if we go from a business persona and say, look, you have all these problems, that's the answer to that to receive. So what? What I found more interesting is that, and that links back to the context that Ruta was saying, is creating that more contextual aspect, is creating a more risk-based aspect, because abstract a lot of this information and helps the business making an intelligence decision on what to fix, and helps us getting involved in those conversations, because ultimately the business will not operate at risk zero. Even the DoD, even the most military organization will not operate at security zero. They will want to operate at a certain specific security level. And as a security professional, it seems to blow our mind. And I think that's the other aspect that create that divide. What do you think, Beck? Are we completely mad, or are we just measured in the wrong way?
Well, I don't think that you're completely mad at all, and I think it's kind of natural, and even outside of security, it's natural, because even if you're looking at across HR, have probably got one set of metrics. Your sales team have got something different. We're all there in an organisation for a different reason. So it's kind of natural. And if you think about the way that organisations have been hierarchically organised for, I don't know how many years, since the 50s or whenever it was, even before then, it's what we know, it's what we're used to. And what we don't do is actually stop and just take stock and think, why do we do things the way we do them? We never question it. And yet you think how much businesses have changed just in the last 10 years with the sheer pace of introduction of technology, things like the pandemic getting in the way that business works, the way that we're so much more global now. And yet we're probably still running our organisations along the same processes and structures that we've had for years. But when do we ever stand still and take stock of what we've got and think, is it still suitable for use? Is it still relevant? I don't think we ever do, because we're constantly looking forward and managing whatever's going on in the business. And I think that we don't necessarily look at the way we're structured, the processes that we have in place and the systems and the way that teams work. And I think if you did that and almost started again from a blank sheet and said, in the ideal world, what do we want to achieve? How do we go about doing that? I think that you would actually design a company in a completely different way. Now, I'm not saying that it's feasible to do that, but it's just about having that mindset, I think, to say, stop looking down, if there's a problem here, let's find a solution. It's about staying in the, I hate this phrase, the problem space, to find out about, well, why are things happening? Why aren't we doing this? But it's a natural human reaction with the brain is to, here's a problem, I must solve it. And we have a natural propensity to take action, when actually what we need to do is to stand still and think a little bit more.
I think that's really interesting, actually, what you've said, in particular around, we just don't review what we have in place, in particular with things like metrics and things like that. Like, the metrics that you use in one scenario is, like, let's say you brought in a new security tool and you want to know how effective it is across the business. The metrics you use at the start when you're onboarding people is going to be so different to the metrics you should be looking at about a year or two down the line when everything's in BAU, right? So I think a lot of metrics don't mean very much, but they can be useful depending on the context that you use them in. And that's why it's so important to review whether that context still makes sense. So, for example, going back to, bringing a new tool, you might start, you're bringing in, let's say, a SAST scanning tool, code scanning, brought a new one in across the business, you're seeing how people are starting to use it. You might report up to the board, this is the number of vulnerabilities we found, and this is how many we fixed in the last month. Those numbers don't actually mean very much, because, the number of vulnerabilities will change month on month, regardless of whether you do anything. One team might seem like they have a lot of vulnerabilities in that area because they're actually the biggest area of the business, and that's why they have so many in comparison to an area that is really small. Like, it doesn't mean much. However, it can be useful in scenarios such as, this is a new tool, we're trying to prove that we should get funding again next year. So you go to the board and you're like, this is what we have, look, it's a bit scary, and like, look, but we are making progress because we now have this information. So really good in the start of saying, we're actually getting people on board, people are using this as evidence that people are using it. We're not saying that this necessarily this is reducing risk and this is making us more secure, or like on the whole, and making the customer experience better, but this is one step in a bigger process that we'll need to do. And then as we continue on, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, we're not reporting on that aspect. We're reporting on other aspects. We're reporting, okay, this area of the business had a day zero vulnerability, and they managed to fix it with this information this quickly. You're looking at it from a slightly different context, because the business context has changed, and so you need to go back and review your metrics. Are they still being useful to you? Are they providing the value that you wanted them to provide? Because they might have done, 5-10 years ago, but if you're just continually automatically putting them into reports and not looking at them, no one is. It's pointless. It's a waste of time. So yeah.
I like that idea. I like the maturity of the metrics evolved with the evolution of the project and the organization. At the beginning, you might just measure people on things that they do and fix that they do because you don't have any better way, or that's your first step. But a lot of the business remains stuck in that limbo. That's the problem. And I see, like, this is the metric that we have. This is the unit that we have. Nobody questioned the why. And we seem to accept the fact that, we have critical, we have fixed rate. Let's stick with that. And that will measure the performance of our team. And we get driven into this volumetric discussion that are clearly not solving anything. And I think what was seen of late is that we got a lot of breaches due to data security and product security, or people infiltrating third party, like the SolarWind attack that we had, or the movie transfer. But we get infiltration on software specific element, and now the SEC has stepped in and actually raised a lawsuit against a CISO and making him personally responsible. So I think that is a bad behavior, but also is going to raise question on maybe the metrics that we're using are not delivering the value that we have, and there is somebody's neck on the block. So that will probably make the why heavier. Or are we doing wrong so many times? Are we continuing down a path that is not delivering value, and actually so much so that somebody from an external is ringing a bell and saying, look, now you are liable for this. Now you are personally liable for this. I think personally, that drives the wrong behavior, but it's definitely a warning sign that a whole state have taken a stand on your product shall be secure. And now how do we measure product security? That is the why. That is the new why. And that drives all of those metrics into, I think, a second gear. So maybe this is the question for Ruta. How would you measure product security?
That's a horrible question. I think it kind of depends. Once again, it depends on the context, right? It depends on what you want to achieve. And it depends on your company. It depends on where you are in your journey with application security. Like it's, like we mentioned, like your maturity will massively depend on what you're trying to achieve. You can focus on like the most critical areas of business, aka the most public facing areas of the business, and you can go in and be like, okay, well, your team is really on it and they're really agile, and so we can look at their cycle times and look at how quickly they fix these security issues depending on, like, you can do that, and that's fine and that's great. But if it doesn't make sense for your business or your teams aren't that mature, it's not going to help you in the slightest. So actually, it's looking at what do your customers want? What are your customers actually expecting from you? Like, a lot of people don't seem to care as much anymore about their data being sold on the web, because it happens all the time. They're more worried about, let's say, if my banking app, I am far more worried about that information getting out than I am about, I don't know, my Facebook profile being posted somewhere when that's already public or something like that. Like it's taking that consideration. What do your customers expect from a security aspect in your industry context, and adjusting the way you deal with it and what you measure accordingly. So I appreciate that's a bit wishy-washy, but yeah, it depends.
No, I think you raise a very interesting point, and I want back opinion on it, on the fact that as human we get used to the new status quo. So the constant breach or the constant behavior, there is a magnitude effect. Like we've seen this with the Zealous, we've seen this with Okta, where the share price have been impacted massively, hence the reputation and the value of the company in front of the external people have actually had an impact. But you raise an interesting point, Ruta, that is, as human, we get used to a status quo that is now the constant state of breach. What do you think, Beck? Are we getting used to the fact that our data is going to be always breached, and then there is a different level of impact that in our brain we start calculating what's important for us as a customer?
Think, again, yeah, I mean, there is so much in the press about breaches, and has been for a number of years, and especially the big ones when they hit. And recently there was one about, it was somebody who was looking after pension details, and data appeared on the web and they had to take actions and that sort of thing. And I think that when it happens to you, you probably feel a massive amount of discomfort because you are personally impacted. And if someone's going to take, if pension details are very personal, so if that data's on the web, have I frozen? You've frozen.
Yes, but we can still hear you.
Yeah, that's all right, because I'm putting a really silly face now. I think I'm just going to die of shame. I think
you can stop and restart the camera.
Yeah, we get used to it. You get used to hearing about it, but it's like most things. It only really hits home when it happens to you. So I think that,
and maybe that's an aspect. Yeah. Maybe that's an aspect that is interesting. Are we as a business not caring that much anymore, or is business not taking into consideration security because we're going to get breached anyway? So the consequences are slightly different from everybody, but there is a different level of magnitude. So assume breach should be the new status quo, saying we're going to get breached. But if we're going to get breached on this particular element, then our face is going to be served on a plate, to not say something else. If this other part is getting breached, yes, we're going to get probably some discomfort, but our face is going to be kind of safeguarded.
I'm not sure we're at that stage yet for people who are not directly involved in cybersecurity. I think that if you're very much involved in that area, then this is stuff that you know lots about. The general public and anybody outside of security, I'm not sure that it's hit home enough yet. And
So
I wonder if that has an impact.
Sorry,
I was going to say, but do you think that's because the end user doesn't actually have much control over it? So your customers don't have control over whether whatever company that they're using has a breach, right? So my data, yeah, sure, I can decline cookies and things like that, but generally if I've signed up to use something, I have no control over what happens with my data if there is a breach. You know, like I can't protect myself any more than the usual, make sure my password's more secure and things like that.
And that's it's funny, actually, I was in a conversation earlier on today about this a thing called the theory of reasoned action. And one of those things is, why do we behave the way we do? And part of that is, do we actually feel that we have any power to change things? And exactly as you've just pointed out, we don't.
So how do we bring back the topic of product security? What is product security? Yes, you're back.
I dropped out there, so I kind of missed. Yeah, I dropped out, so I kind of missed the last back end of the conversation there. Sorry about that.
Elizabeth has raised in the chat quite an interesting point, that is bringing in the business cost, understanding the impacts, or communicating fundamentally what is the consequence of a breach or a consequence of a security element that I really like as an element of product security, because you can bring risk in a way, but also business impact or an impact to the business, that are metrics together with losing face that could be another level of impact or a consequence of this. And back to what you were saying, Beck, I think slowing down and doing an exercise with the business was like, okay, let's assume breach. Let's assume this particular area of the business get compromised. With this particular, I'll make an example, Log4j. What are we going to do? Are we prepared for it? Like a table topic exercise that's going to help the business identify kind of the areas that are gray. And product security is probably the first blatant area, because they say, okay, what product do we have? Usually it's quite like, yeah, we have a website, but what that website mean? What is composed that website? How much money we could lose if the website goes down for 1, 3, 4 hours? And I haven't talked about security at all. This is business continuity and resiliency. But sometimes as a business owner, we take these things for granted.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the stuff I've done in resilience is looking at how do you deal with a cybersecurity crisis. And part of that is there's the whole point about doing tabletop exercises. But then that itself, I think, it's a massive ask. There's a lot of people involved. They're quite time and resource heavy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that great tabletop exercise where everybody's involved in one particular event. But it's about having those questions. So like you say, is there a group that meets and they say, if X situation happened, if the website goes down, how are we going to communicate amongst ourselves? How are we going to communicate to our customers? Actually, what impact is that going to have on the customers? Now, most of us bank online. So if you're a bank and you've got no way of banking online, people are not necessarily going to be able to access, pay their bills, access their salaries, all of that sort of thing. So what are you going to do then? I think it's about having those conversations beforehand. And if you're having them across the different groups within the organisation, you're going to have those difficult conversations about where priorities come in, but you're doing that in a safe space, in a slow time. Because if you're doing that in an emergency situation, you've got enough on your plate and you are not going to have the wit and wherewithal to have the conversations where you can actually listen to somebody else, because it's very much a case of something really bad has gone wrong, we've got to fix it. So you lose all of the niceties. It's a scary situation to be in. So for me, it's about it's about planning, isn't it, beforehand, and about understanding those consequences. And I think that I had a discussion along these lines of a few months back, and one of the suggestions is that actually what you need to do is to throw really everything into it in terms of what could happen if. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the things you think about. What if somebody turns off something by mistake? And it's, how does that going to happen? So it's trying to think about unusual events and being a little bit creative about those things as well, instead of just thinking, the basic obvious things. But the more you're having those conversations, the more you're understanding other people within different areas of the business. So whilst you might be talking about what happens in a critical situation, going back to how we started, 10, 15 minutes ago, and with the conversation that we're having with Ruta there, was that actually, if you're getting people to talk to each other across the business on a more regular basis, they're building up those relationships, they're building up understanding of how the rest of the business ticks. So actually, it has an impact, I think, on day-to-day running of the business, as well as the cybersecurity incident aspect of it.
And calling it cybersecurity, maybe it's the wrong term. It's business resiliency, is business continuity, as Elizabeth was mentioning in the chat. It's having that context of security taken out of the word, and how you name things actually matter, because as soon as you label it security thing, it becomes a security responsibility. As soon as you call it business continuity thing with a security aspect in it, or maybe security facilitate that element, it has a whole connotation. Ruta, from that aspect, what do you think from a dev perspective? Sorry, Beck, do you want to jump in there?
No, I was just about to say about it's all about risk, isn't it? And risk comes from different areas. So I wonder if it's about taking it out of the silo areas of the business and just talking about risk overall. So if you had a chief risk officer, I don't know if that's rather than security, physical security, cyber, is just about looking at it from a different angle.
I mean, a cyber risk officer, and that's a whole different discussion of. Sometimes risk is completely disconnected from engineering. We were having a discussion about GRC engineering or risk engineering. So connecting those two areas together, because what we're discussing right now is a very technical field. There's a chief risk officer. You might have it as a single icon of security is one of the risks, but going so in depth, yes, you can surface a lot of areas, but they tend to be technical or business risk. And depending on the size of the business, the chief risk officer might be too disconnected in a good or a bad way from this whole scenario. I think the CTO, CIO, and the CISO having those table topic exercise and discussion, or at least being in the room where those things get discussed about a specific subject, helps creating that board level discussion, at least the main headline of like, okay, we're going to lose £1 million. Then your chief risk officer, then your chief finance officer is going to listen to, okay, that's a risk that actually has a significant impact. Now, why that might happen? It might happen because we have a critical vulnerability on the external website. Now, that's how we reconnect the business to a specific problematic and an outcome that we want to achieve, and saying, okay, anything that is web-facing should have zero critical vulnerability, and especially on the business impacting website. Now, this is how we connect business to security to development to achieve a product security outcome. And I think that's the most beautiful things that I've seen it happen when you have this discussion and you realize the aha moment that all of these volumetrics and vulnerability don't matter if you have that one single thing in there. And you can discover that by having this exercise and saying, okay, but what are the vulnerabilities that really matters? The ones that are sitting there, that are critical, that are actually exploited in the wild, and people can actually go 3 lines of code and exploit it, take our website down, £1 million worth of fine, and then reputational damage. Like 5-second exercise, but we've been talking about business risk and business impact. And I think where I want to go with this is the business, is the empathy and the contextual empathy that you bring in as a security with both the engineering community that is focused on do, and the business community that is focusing on operating at the maximum speed with the minimum cost and maintaining a risk level that they are okay with.
I think that's really interesting as well, because the empathy aspect, yes, because that's something that businesses overall struggle with between departments, between roles all the time. But I think there's always a completely different empathy gap between, let's say, board level people who make all those, bigger strategic business decisions and finance decisions and things like that, and everyone doing the do, as they say. So it's quite interesting actually that you mentioned that, Francesco. And I want to throw a question back to you. So going to the board and being like, we can have these conversations. Let's say this happens and we lose £1 million. What do we do? How do you avoid that from being once again another negative focused scare tactic to start the conversation in security, when that's frequently the way that we go about it? How do you stop that from seeming like, oh, once again something disastrous is happening? Why do we have to talk about it again?
I think I'm gonna reply to that with a story that is, I was running one of these table topic exercise, and not everybody was aware of it, like crisis management. And at the executive level, we had people crying, broken down and crying. It's like, we're gonna be failing, like it's gonna be total massive hole in our budget, we can't sustain it, like people crying and breaking down. So we have to realize that we're dealing with human. We have to realize that we're dealing with human on simple metrics, like they're making decisions based on risk. So coming with a problem and a solution and a way for them to drive this continuously, first of all, as professional, brings and elevate our status so much higher. When we come to the boards, we're coming to an adult table with problem and responsibility. Like everybody could lose their job, or tons of people in the business could lose their job if board members or executive member made the wrong decision. So we should respect that and come there with not just raising problem, not just raising awareness, because I think the business right now are totally aware of where risk is and how important cyber is. But we need to come with a solution. We need to come with action or a way to drive these things forward. Like saying that the metrics don't work, the next question you're going to get asked is like, okay, so which metric do we use? And not having that answer lower down our status, because we're wasting their time. It's a decision point that we burned. Coming with critical problem like, okay, if a website goes down, we lose £1 million. So what? So what are we going to do about it? We're going to not use the website. We're going to fix all the problem. Like having those answers at scale, an example of like, okay, these are our top 3 product line, and this is the risk level where they are. And if you operate at this risk level, you could lose this amount of money. If you operate at this risk level, you could lose potentially that amount of money. That is a decision that they can make on and saying, okay, we're comfortable with this risk level because we can insure it, or we can react on it, or no, we want to go lower. And having an answer of like, okay, from an engineering perspective, for the CTO, how many man hours are you currently spending in actually fixing issue? Okay, with this kind of regular pace, it's going to take you 60 days, 80 days, 90 days, 2 quarters, 5 quarters to actually reach that point. Okay, maybe the CTO needs to double down that effort. Now you made it from a security problem into a business problem, into a responsibility of a technology problem, to actually decide, yes, I'm going to live with it. No, I'm not going to live with it. I'm going to double that time. And that turns completely the table, because it's not security begging for a vulnerability to be fixed, for a patch to be fixed. It's security informing the business that they're operating at this risk level, with whatever risk level it is, with example and an action plan to actually drive that risk down or make some interesting decision. And then driving those points as well with exercise of like, okay, we run a table topic exercise on this particular application. And if this, and this happens, these are the consequences. We could go down for 1 day, 3 days, 6 days. And this is how much roughly we could potentially lose. Like 5-second sentence, a plan and an action. The decision is mostly, yes, continue, double down, or let's ensure, or let's do more of it. And in that way, we elevate the status. But not only that, we empower our stakeholders in the executive community to make risk-based decisions. That is where they are super expert, because they are highly paid and experienced in that element. If we bring out that context and we bring our security context in, we lose them because they can't make a decision. It's like giving a baby a a laptop and saying, can you code this in Python? And it's like, maybe it's going to create something with ChatGPT, but more likely it is that it's not going to be able to make any decision. If we give a baby some toys to actually make some Lego, maybe we have better chance. I don't know where I'm coming from with this example, but maybe we have a better chance to actually drive the point home, or to get an outcome that we both want. As a business, create product securely, and as a security, help the business creating that product securely.
I think this goes back to how we, right to the very start, is the way that I see it. It's about that thing about the cultural intelligence thing. So it's about being able to relate to and communicate to other people. Now, knowing that your board wants some simple numbers to make very quick decisions on, you know what information they want, give it to them in the way that they want to have it, because that's all part of the influencing things. You don't have to use scare tactics to do this. It's give them business metrics, give them graphs that they can see and just understand very quickly. I think it's about tuning in to what's important, the values and the beliefs of the board level members, and their style of
individual member and preparing them before.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people are going to want different things. But if you're working within one organisation and you have a board team that you know fairly well, you're going to know what information is important to which people. You should know really what information they need in order to make that decision. So it's about covering those different perspectives. And
as a CISO, you should. As a CISO, you should spend one-to-one to actually understand those things, because I've seen an interesting behavior in a board that is either alpha people that drives the discussion home and other people that are not. And if you get enough alpha, sorry for using the term alpha, but if you're using enough of these people that drive decision point, and if you have their support, then the whole board will come with you. So sometimes those are not logical decisions, or emotional decisions. And that's why I say it's security. We need to be selling a lot of this stuff. And selling is done with emotion. It's not done with logic or numbers. Numbers and support.
Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting, because that's a classical psychological concept of groupthink. You know, the group will go along with the strongest member, because if you've got somebody who is very much leading the discussion, and if you try and chip in with something you're not acknowledged, then you're never going to carry on chipping in with something. So the group is going to make a decision to go down a certain path, whether that's the right path or not, because it's led by a particularly strong character. And that was something that came up in some research that the Ministry of Defence have done into various things that have happened. And in order to stop that happening, they came up with a thing called reasonable challenge. And it's how to give a challenge to somebody in that particular situation, but also how a senior leader understands how to deal with a challenge. So this is not a personal attack. This is not an ego thing. And what they've done is they've rolled out this whole thing about dealing with leadership. And that as a leader, it isn't your responsibility to make all of the decisions if you're not the leader who has expertise across everything. It's about learning to listen to the team. And another thing that I heard about, it was with special forces. They're obviously in situations that are very high stakes. And what they find is they actually have the hierarchy collapses at that point, and you start listening to the person who's most experienced rather than the leader who's going to make the decisions for the company. So for me, it's about leadership as a role is changing in its nature. There are times when you have to be the leader and command and control, and this is the way we're going. But then there are times where you need to step back and listen to experts, and the leader's role becomes more of a critical analyst of all of the information that's coming in to make a decision. So for me, this is very much, it's what is known in the research as VUCA. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That applies, I think, to cybersecurity. and you require different skills from leadership in those particular circumstances. So what I've seen from an occupational psychology point of view is that leadership development and leadership training is changing. It isn't about leading from the front anymore. It's about understanding that in those situations where things are difficult, it's a thing called wicked problems. There is no single straight solution. You're never going to fix it straight away. It's going to be a series of decisions you have to make. And actually, leadership in that circumstance looks very different to leadership in day-to-day activities. So it's interesting to see where this is going, I think.
That's
Sorry,
a
I've just
lot
taken it on completely different. Yeah, I just
no. It's a very interesting element to unpack, and I like how we stream from board mentality and herd mentality those, and the leadership is actually quite interesting because I've seen that happening in crisis in a good or a bad way. Considering we're almost at the time, I wanna leave to the audience the ability to actually ask question in the chat. If we want to summarize the point or wrap up basically with the last kind of message for everybody to drive home from a psychology perspective and from a security perspective on what has worked and what hasn't worked, what will be the point? Maybe we can start with Ruta on security perspective. What has worked for you in terms of influencing the right behavior at a developer perspective and as a stakeholder senior perspective?
So we mentioned empathy quite a few times, and that's the key thing, really. It's helping people understand your world, whilst also being willing to understand other people's world. It's very easy in security to have someone say, we've done this, and you're like, why would anyone ever do this in this way? And so actually, it's probably a series of loads of different decisions that made sense at the time that has led to this solution that's happened in this sort of way. But actually, when you look at it with the question right from the start, and you haven't looked at the journey, it makes no sense. So it's actually understanding how have they gotten to the place that they are at, as long, and same as like telling them, you know, this is why we are imposing this. This is why we're recommending you fix this issue, or you look at this metric, or whatever it is. It's explaining the why, giving the context to people, and trusting them to tell them that as well. In security, we're very good at saying, no, you know, to be secure, no one should know anything apart from what we tell them in this specific context. It's like, no, well, actually, we're asking you to implement this because we've actually had a bit of an issue in this other area of the business that has caused, you know, this massive issue that's happened behind the scenes. Like, it's not impacted you, but we're trying to send this out across the entire business to help. And then people are much more willing to do things and try things out. Another aspect is highlighting also how you can benefit each other. So, you know, from security being like, hey, if you fix this one thing and bring this ticket into your backlog or whatever it is, why don't you can use this as a situation to say, hey, security has told us that we need to spend 10% of our time this week on security issues. The security fix might only take 10 seconds. You know, it might just be an updated version or something like that. Why don't you use it as an opportunity to also do some tech debt that you wanted to fix something else that you wanted to. Feel free to use this as a scapegoat, you know, build that rapport with people, and just show that they can rely on you and you can rely on them. And it doesn't all have to be very serious and work focused and everything. Like, you can help each other out in different ways than you've realized. So empathy is my big one, but I appreciate we've talked about that a lot. Yeah.
No, I like that. And I like the fact that you empathize, you sit in their sprint planning, you help them planning, you help them making the case for security. But also from a leadership perspective, you need to convince somebody to drive top down, because if they need to do that on the side of the desk once, twice, thrice, and that's about it, how much they're going to spend, especially as soon as things will start pumping into more things that need to be delivered and features. Beck, what will be your closing wrap-up point of suggestion from leaders and security professional perspective?
I think Ruta said it all. It's about identifying with people, understanding, and it's the power of the narrative, the story. People love stories. If you understand where somebody's coming from, they've told you their story, you understand their perspective more often. So it's about talking to each other, but also about active listening. And I think that's what builds trust. And once you've got trust, that builds resilience, because you know that you've got a team around you that's going to help you. You're not on your own. You've got the confidence to deal with things. So it's all about the relationships.
I like that. And I think my final point to drive it home, connecting back to the discussion on how to challenge anyone. You can argue with people, but you can't argue with data. It's very hard to argue with hard facts. You can argue if you're a data scientist, you can probably argue about where the data come from and how you select that data. It's really difficult to argue with. It's very easy to argue with opinion. It's very hard to argue with hard fact. That's why I mentioned before, coming to the board or coming to a senior discussion with 3 cases and the evidence of those cases helps you driving that argument home, regardless how alpha is the other person on the other side of the table. And as the first security conversation, more likely than not, we're going to get very serious look and a lot of pushback unless we massage. But we come into a board decision with non-revenue generating elements, they're going to slow the business down. So the immediate knee-jerk reaction that we should expect is pushback. So we need to be as prepared as possible to say, okay, this is the risk level of this particular line of product. This is how much money you could lose. This is the action plan that we have to actually drive these things down. Now, this is a risk decision. It's not a security decision. Do we keep operating at this level? Because from a security perspective, we can help also accelerate on 3-4 element. But is this a matrix that's going to get embedded in all the sprint planning of like 10%, as Ruta was saying, of things that every week we focus on security fixes? And then as a security team, we can help each individual development team to identify what is the biggest bang for bucks, what is the biggest risk reduction element that they can focus on. This particular library, this file, this particular exercise, tabletop exercise in threat modeling or review or anything, but you have that metric, so you have that time. But always bring risk, quantification, and an action plan to actually say, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, or this is where we're continuing. If we continue on this, this is the amount of money or damage that we could suffer, and this is the way to actually not suffer it. All right. I think this discussion has been brilliant, and it's been wonderful to hear AppSec runs, but also an action plan. We usually, as I mentioned to Beck, we usually sit down as application security professional, and it feels a therapy session or a way to relieve ourselves from the pain that is driving a very tough subject home. But I like to close with a positive message that the outside world is listening to security or is actually scrutinizing security, and that is driving the question, at least, do we have the right metrics to actually evaluate our product security? And the answer is no, but it's starting to make wave and make us as security professionals think, how can we change things? So last thoughts, positive thoughts only. Let's start with you, Beck.
I think it's about being open to change, isn't it? To me, it's about having that a change mindset, an agile mindset, and not getting too stuck in your ways. So I think that there's a lot to be gained from that. And I think that if you have a very positive, let's look at what we can do about this, rather than getting together for a therapy session, then that's going to change the nature of those meetings, isn't it? So yeah, look at things. It's about reframing it in psychological terms. If you're framing it as everything's down and dull, then everybody gets and feels that way. If you frame it as this is a challenge, but hey, come on, we can do this, and excite people about that change, then that puts a completely different light on it.
I want to see people high-fiving about security one day, but Ruta, your point, your last closing point, positive.
Perfection is the enemy of good. Giving something a go, even if it doesn't work out, is better than doing absolutely nothing, just because you're trying to work out absolutely every single potential issue or thing that you can improve on. Just give something a go. It's probably better that you have, and you take that and you learn from it, than doing nothing at all. So.
Brilliant. And if anybody want to follow more of what you do here, where they can find more about you, Beck?
Just to put me into the LinkedIn search bar. There's plenty of stuff there, and you'll find that I've done quite a few of these talks. So if you're interested in psychology, go and have a look and have a listen to a few of the webinars.
And LinkedIn, same for me. I think it's just Ruta Baltiejute. There's not many people with my name, so
Brilliant. And for us, Phoenix.security, we have plenty of library. We just finished the the security awareness campaign. But as I like to say, I walk the talk. We haven't done it to make people aware, but we actually use data to help people making other people aware, because we were fed up with like, yeah, we should be aware, but actually this is the data that's going to help you making your business aware. So thank you so much, Ruta, Beck, for coming on the show. This was a beautiful conversation and definitely a different angle to see things and asking the important question is, how can we change things without doing the same things that we've done over and over? Thank you very much, and everybody, for listening in. This is Francesco Cipollone, your host, and we had Beck and Ruta coming on the show. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Bye.